This is Sammy, or her literary on her social media platforms, and she is a reader. She has been reading since she was a little girl. Except for that one awkward phase in her life, AAK high school, where she became chronically online and forgot all about her passion and love for literature. But hey, come 2020, she became an avid reader once again. Thank God. Mostly encapsulated by romance books, such as Funny Story by Emily Henry and A Court of Mist and Fury, Sammy has always had a special liking towards romance books, and have always seen classic literature as intimidating and daunting, until the year 2025. This year, she surprised herself by reading more books out of her comfort genre, and in this video, she'll discuss all the books she read in the big year of 2025. Sammy? The floor is yours.
Hello, I'm Sammy. Welcome to my 2025 reading wrap-up. And before we get started, I would just like to thank myself. I would just like to acknowledge my efforts of reaching my reading goal this year, because last year I wasn't able to reach my reading goal. But anyways, for 2025, I was able to achieve or reach my reading goal, which is 20 books. And I will admit that I did kind of cram in the last minute, especially during December. My December was my most productive reading month. I was able to read like 8 freaking books, which is insane. But don't worry, I focused mainly on short stories last December, for me to reach my goal. I'm very surprised, in a good way, that I was able to venture out of that genre this year. I was able to explore more stories that didn't necessarily center around romance or love or the pursuit of love. So I was able to read classics this year. Genuinely didn't expect myself to venture in this kind of path for my reading journey this year, so I'm really proud. I just gotta say it out there. Okay, so without further ado, it's now 6 minutes in. I will be showing you my reading journey this 2025. So I was able to read 20, and most of the books that I read are digital. So don't expect like a whole stack of 20 books right beside me, because I don't. Anyways, so let's begin. I have my little e-reader here, which is basically just my iPad mini that I've had since I was a kid, and I just want to show you guys because it's so cute. Look at that. So let's begin with January. So January I started strong. I was able to read 3 books. So you can tell the difference in my traction in my reading journey when you compare the first half of the year and the second half of the year. But anyways, let's get on. For January, I was able to read 3, and I was still very committed to the whole romance genre. But this, I never really expected this to be my first 2025 read, but I have no whatsoever regret. Anyways, the first book that I read this year is Manacled by SenLinYu. Yes, it's the one from the AO3 version. This is actually published now under the title Alchemized, and I've seen the physical book in bookstores, and it's been so tempting. Like, I saw tote bags that had like the Alchemized merch, kind of like that, and it was so tempting, but I didn't buy it because it was so expensive. But anyways, Manacled, I was surprised. This is my first time reading an AO3 fanfiction and reading a 2,000 pages worth. I'm still trying to process that. I actually applaud myself for being able to read that. But anyways, I gave this a 4 stars. This was rounded up from 3.75. The majority of the population's review for Manacled is positive. It has such a high rating on Goodreads, which really surprised me when I first researched about it. I do appreciate this book. I applaud and acknowledge the author's commitment. You can tell from the plotting that the author really took the time to plot the entire story, And I'm not going to lie, the plot was very clever. Although, one bone I have to pick is the length. I remember like finally like finishing the book. I thought I was gonna cry, but I didn't, which is kind of like the biggest letdown. The biggest letdown of the century. I was like, oh my god, I want to cry. I want to cry. But I didn't cry. But I will say that I was emotional and I kind of established an emotional connection with the characters. I just feel like with the length of the book, I wasn't really able to appreciate like the length of it because it was so long, and I was like, I mean, there were a lot of important events that happened, but I feel like some chapters could have been shorter and some chapters could have been left out. I guess I don't know how they rewrote the story for Alchemized, which kind of makes it tempting to read Alchemized and see what changed and if I'm going to like the story better now that it's like published formally. So yeah, but Manacled, I do appreciate this book. I understand why a lot of people like it. I do understand the emotional stakes that were included in this book. To me, I think the author did very well with depicting what it means to experience PTSD and just like complex trauma and post-war trauma. Yeah, because like Manacled was really traumatic. Like you can really tell how traumatized the characters were. I feel like one of the reasons why it wasn't really emotional for me because you can tell from the get-go, like from the beginning, that emotional stakes were very high and it never really went low. You don't really feel the buildup of the intensity of the emotional impact because it's always been high. So to me, I kind of had a hard time not connecting because I'm gonna sound like cold and dense, but like I don't know, I just feel like I've been constantly told by the narrator that the emotional stakes are high. So I kind of got used, I guess, to the emotion of the high emotional stake. There never really was like a moment where like I'm surprised that the emotional stakes suddenly got high because it's always been high. But anyways, so Manacled 4 stars. The second one that I read, this is the first and only book that I DNF'd for the entire 2025, which is A Perfect Vintage by Chelsea Fagan. This one I DNF'd particularly because the trope between the female character and the male character wasn't my cup of tea. I remember the last note that I left on this book was like, hello, pedo behavior. So after that, I was completely turned off, and I realized that it was going to be like a younger male situation and an older female, and that doesn't really sit right with me. Although I don't really have a problem with that in real life for other people, but it's just my preference. I don't really like reading about stuff like that. It just gives me the irk. To me, the character's behavior was very problematic, so I just had to like put it down. And then the last read for January is another Dramani AO3, and this one is a lot shorter, and this is actually the Dramani fan fiction that I liked the most out of the 3 Dramani fan fictions that I've read. This one is called Apple Pie and Other Amends, and the reason why I love this one so much, it gave me that slice of life feeling and the cute, fluffy romance scenes that I was looking for. Apple Pie and Other Amends is a lot easier to read. The initial premise of this book was what got me to read it, which is basically Hermione giving out baked goods and pastries to like wizarding families and her colleagues as a sort of closure to what happened before and what's happening now, because this is set in the post-war Harry Potter world. So yeah, that initial premise was very interesting to me, and it really delivered. It was such a cozy read. I did enjoy it. Come on, Apple Pies and Other Amends. How can you not like the book from the title itself? So yeah, those are my January reads. For February, I was able to read 2, and the first one is my last Dramani fanfiction, which is The Auction. This is a tad bit shorter than Manacled, specifically like 400 pages shorter. This one I liked a lot more than Manacled, and as I was like reviewing my notes and like refreshing my memory with what happened, because honestly, the plotting between these two and the setting is very similar. So in my head, it kind of blurs the plot between the two. And once I refreshed my memory, I realized that the reason why I loved the auction so much is not only because of the chemistry between Draco and Hermione here, and just like the tension was a lot more palpable. It was also the found family trope, which I never expected. I was very taken aback with the change of heart in Lucius in the end of the story. I'm not gonna spoil because maybe some of you will read this one. Oh, and this one is actually in print. I love this one a lot better. I gave it a 4.5 stars. Oh, and sorry, the apple pies and other mans I gave 4.75. This one I gave 4.5. I did cry for this one. I remember crying for this one because Draco promised Hermione that he will eventually release her because he was the one who bought her at the auction, and he had always promised that he will let her go or he will release her, and he didn't fail in delivering. I mean, he made sure that he kept his promise, is what I'm trying to say. And the things that he had to do to keep that promise, to me, was very emotional. And reading the Malfoy family treat Hermione right was such a refreshing perspective. And I know this will never happen in the real Harry Potter world, but just like seeing that alternate possibility to me was a lot more emotional. And seeing that there was a character development in these villains made the reading experience a lot more emotional for me. So yeah, that was the auction. I love this one so much. And then the second February read is But How Are You Really? This is by Ella Dawson. And yeah, I give this like a 3.5 stars because it was mediocre. I didn't hate it, but nothing really stood out to me when I read this book. Didn't really connect with the characters, and maybe that's a me problem. Just to simplify things and make it a lot faster, this wasn't really my cup of tea. The like setting of this one was the protagonist is going back to a college reunion, and we all know how mentally debilitating and just mentally taxing the thought of seeing people from your high school again. And there was a lot of tension regarding careers and like, you know, just like the stability of adult life and the pressure to get it together is basically this book. It's like, you should have had your shit together because like we're adults now. It's kind of like the social pressure, the societal norm of having your shit together. But this book addresses that it's okay not to have things solved. It's okay to not have your life like organized like a type A neurotic person. It's okay to still figure things out. And a lot of the book's theme comes from mental health advocacy, hence the title. But How Are You Really? It really addresses like mental health issues, especially how they escalate when it comes to people or like colleagues asking how is your life. I guess that's why there are words in the title, specifically but and really, because when you say how are you, there are multiple ways how you can like answer that. But like when you add the words but and really, which becomes but how are you really, it becomes this unfiltered raw answer. And when you get that answer as the listening part of the conversation, you should still be supportive and you should still like listen with an open heart and not judge, is basically what this book is trying to say. So yeah, I don't hate it. It's just not something that I would go back to. So for March, I wasn't able to read during March. And then April, I was able to read 2. And the first one that I read is, I'm gonna try and show you guys. So this is my first My first April read, which is The End of Loneliness. This is literary fiction, if I'm not mistaken, and I gave it a 4 stars. The reason thereof is I love the message of this book. Basically, I'm gonna try to be as concise as possible. But basically, we follow this character. The first part of the book tackles his present life, where he's grieving over the loss of his wife. His wife died because of cancer, if I'm not mistaken, and we see that he's very estranged and alienated, despite having a family, despite having his brother, his sister, and his children that he had with his wife. And then we go later in the story, we discover that this main character that we have has been estranged for most of his life. Basically, he has an older brother, him, and then his younger sister. And they were orphaned at a very early age because of an accident. So that was the first oh no, actually that wasn't the first estrangement. The first estrangement is his dog. His dog died because of an accident. I don't remember the particulars of that accident, but it's an accident, quote unquote. And then the second one after that is the accident with his parents. And then after that, so they were orphaned, and then they got sent to boarding school, the older brother and the main character. And the main character had hopes of, being closer with his brother, having that emotional support, despite being in a foreign place, but that didn't really met his expectations because his brother became this jock, and it kind of tore apart the relationship because his brother didn't treat him like a brother. There were actually parts in the story where the brother was acting like a dick towards the main character, so that was another point of the story. And then finally he meets his wife, and it was through this wife that really brought back color to his life. If you have read or even watched the book A Man Called Otto, it shares a very similar premise with that novel or that movie, having this person and then losing them. So we all know the grief that comes with a person who has given you so much light, so much joy, and so much color in your life, and then losing them. So the premise of this book explores how grief and regret and estrangement from the people who were supposed to love you during your earlier years. It explores that and its impact towards your current life, towards the kind of relationships that you have now. This one tackles mental health issues, depression, and suicide. So check out the trigger warnings before you read it. The character at the end of the story was able to let go of that loneliness when he realized that his children were trying to reach to him, because his children was grieving too, but he didn't really realize that. He was just absorbed in this bubble of bubble of grief, that he forgot that he has children. I remember there was this one specific part of the book where he was like, I don't even know my children. There was this thing that his son did that kind of reminded him of himself, and that kind of was like the breaking point. It was like, I don't even know my children, and that kind of pulled him out of that. I felt melancholia reading this book because I understand the grief that comes with losing your loved one, and I understand the grief of feeling alone in your childhood years. So just seeing that in this book was very special to me. My first note in this book, I am shattered. And I'm only like 34 pages in. It was a difficult read, to be honest, but I love it. And then the next book that I read is a childhood favorite because April is my birth month, and I decided to commemorate with turning 22. I decided to read a book from my favorite book series when I was a kid, Dork Diaries. And it's very fitting because it's titled Tales from a Not So Happy Birthday. Focus. So I thrifted this one, and I'm just so glad with this because I also got like an envelope or like an invitation card for happy birthday, which is really fun. And the thing that I've done with my Dork Diaries when I was a kid is I literally like put my name and my address, and it's just so coincidental. She did the exact same thing And I don't know, that's just like a moment of synchronicity, and that just feels a lot nostalgic, and just it just makes me feel like I'm a kid again. And just like knowing that other people also do that, it's just like kind of like a comfort, a hug. Look at that. It says happy birthday. It says to 22-year-old Sammy, and then from the back it says from 9-year-old Sammy. So that this is very special to me. I love Dork Diaries. That's my childhood right there. Those were my April reads. And now going to May, June, July, those are all crickets because I was very busy with internship and I wasn't able to read a single page. And then come August, I was able to finish The Midnight Library, which is a very popular book in social media. Book Talk, Bookstagram, BookTube, a lot of people discuss this book. I gave it a 3.5 stars. I do appreciate the meaning of, or like the message of the book, which is basically like you shouldn't ruminate on the things or the decisions that you could have made, because like the premise of the book was the character was trying to pick out the best decision and like trying to live the perfect life, trying to find the perfect life if she had done this. But at the end of the book, the character realizes that the only way to truly live your life is to make peace with the decisions that you've made before and try to make the best decision that you can with your life now, at present, consciously, with intention and with purpose. However, I didn't really feel an emotional connection with the book, but I understand that the author, Matt Haig, is actually a coming-of-age author. If I'm not mistaken, this was only information given to me by my friend, so I'm going to verify that. He's actually an author of many children's fiction, so I understand why the book is written the way it is. I feel like I was reading a children's book, but the themes that I was tackling was very adult. There's this dissonance between the themes of the book and the way it's written. So I guess that kind of was disorienting for me, hence lowering my overall satisfaction. But yeah, I do understand why a lot of people like it. I feel like it's a book that you can recommend to someone who's trying to start reading as a hobby. I feel like this is a book that's easy to get into. So that's for August. I only read one. And then for September, this is my second most productive month. I was able to read 4 books. This was the month that altered everything. Because this was also the month that I stopped mindless consumption and seeing what everyone was reading online. I, however, stumbled upon this booktuber called Melissa, and I love her videos so much. And just the way that she describes her reading experience with classics and just the way she describes them simply enthralled me and captured my interest. So I was like, okay, let's try to read one of her recommendations. And in her video, one of her videos, she was reading I Who Have Never Known Men. So that was the first read that I read last September. So I Who Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Harpman. I gave it 4 stars. This, to me, is a very special read, and it's still a very significant read, especially in our generation today. So we follow this unnamed character who stays unnamed, and basically the entire conflict of this book is a personal one. It's not an interpersonal, it's an intrapersonal, it's an inner conflict where the character was trying to convince herself that she is not human because she doesn't have these earthly experiences. She doesn't remember Earth. She doesn't have memories of her time on Earth because she was still a baby when they were captured. But at the end of the story, she admits finally that she is human because she was capable to love. She's capable of feeling pain, feeling regret, to yearn, to long for people that you love and people who have made you feel like you belong. Because no matter the discrepancies of our experiences, And no matter our culture, no matter our race, we are all innately human. And the one thing that we share as human is the need to belong, the need to feel connection. And that is the main premise of the book, which is very significant to our generation now, because we're always trying to constantly pull from the narrative or detach ourselves from the narrative that we need love, that we need connection, we need a community. I feel like social media and the whole putting boundaries thing, and while there's no problem with establishing boundaries and being independent, I feel like the reason why we're experiencing such an epidemic of loneliness is because we've mistaken independence for isolation, and it kind of loses the essence of community. The reason why I've said that this book is very significant to the generation that we have now is because we have to realize that we are human and we need connection, we need a community, and we need to belong to some kind of community for us to battle with this epidemic of loneliness that a lot of researchers and statisticians and all those are observing in our generation today. So what I'm trying to say is we shouldn't pull ourselves from the narrative that we need love and that we need connection and we need a community, because we have to find a balance between independence and establishing boundaries and finding a community and maintaining friendships. You know, this book is in a sci-fi setting, but honestly it's basically a book that tackles the philosophy and the importance of human connections and the need to acknowledge that we need human connections, and it's okay to want that despite convincing ourselves that we can't or we don't want that, you know? So I love I Have Never Known Men. Go read it if you haven't. And then the next one is my first and only thriller read or mystery read. This is The Family Upstairs by Lisa Jewell. It did its job of, surprising me. There were points of the book that were a little bit disorienting. I mean, like, the entire book was a little bit disorienting because, like, every time a chapter ends, the next chapter is a different perspective, and there are 3 perspectives to consider, which kind of got me a little bit confused at times. In terms of plot, at first I kind of got underwhelmed because the initial premise of the book was very promising, but then it was revealed it was all just like hunches and over exaggerated gossip. And then it was revealed that it was a lot more superficial, I guess, or a lot more light than what was initially introduced to the readers. But despite that, there were still plot twists and there was still an air of mystery and thrill despite that underwhelming feeling when it comes to the plot. So I can say that it's still delivered nonetheless. So yeah, the reason why it's 4.5 and why it has such a high rating, because I really just based this off with like the purpose of reading the book and if it did fulfill that purpose. So yeah, it did. I just got a little bit disoriented with the way it was structured, but nonetheless, it delivered. So yeah, there is actually a second book to this, but I don't know if I'm going to read it because the way the plot of the second book was foreshadowed in the first or the latter end of the first book was, to me, like, it gave me an impression that it's going to be generic and it's going to be predictable, but I don't know. So yeah, but maybe I will, I don't know. And then the next one that I actually have a copy, and I think this is like my favorite read of 2025. This is Letters to Milena. I absolutely love this book. I am still having a hard time digesting that this book exists and these letters exist and a man like Kafka exists. While I do acknowledge Kafka's insecurities and flaws and neuroticism, the way that man yearns is insane. Like, if Anthony Bridgerton was a real person, they would relate with each other so much. Anyways, I just want to show you guys how annotated these are. Like, sorry. Oh my god, it's not, it's focusing on my... I just... I love this book with my whole entire being. Actually, the first read that I'm reading right now, the book that I'm reading right now, is a mirror to this. So this is Letters to Milena, right? And this one that I'm reading is Letters to Kafka. And I'm reading the POV of Milena, and it's such a gripping read. And I love the genre of men yearning. Chitties. Okay, the reason why I gave this a 5 stars is just this book is a perfect depiction of modern relationships and how our personal demons, our insecurities and flaws can still hinder the most passionate, the most reverent love there is. Or like, you know, like Kafka and Milena loved each other so much. They have this almost like a carnal desire for each other. They have this bright, red, illuminant passion for each other, but that wasn't enough because they are dealing with personal demons, especially Kafka. There was this constant push and pull, like, I love you, I love you, I love you, but I can't. There was that constant push and pull. This is it. Like, no matter how much you love one another, no matter how passionate you guys are for each other, if you don't solve your own shit, if you're still neurotic, if you're still flawed, if you let those flaws run the relationship, your relationship's gonna run away. Sorry, I'm just gonna show you like a page. It didn't even focus, sorry. Is it focusing? Focus. There we go. To me, this book is a perfect depiction of trying to make a relationship work while also trying to figure yourself out. It's very tedious and it's mentally taxing. So yeah, but I love this. Go read it if you haven't. Like, I didn't want the letters to end, to be honest. And when we got to the point where Kafka was telling Milena, don't write to me, don't write to me, because this is, your letters are making me insane, like perpetually manically insane. And then the next letter he goes, actually don't listen to me because I actually still don't want to receive letters to you, but can you just like keep it on like a down low, like just kind of like tone it down just a little bit. He was so desperate for her, but he also know that she's his ruin. And then my fourth read for September is White Nights by Fyodor Dostoyevsky, because Melissa was talking about Brothers Karamazov in one of her videos. I think that was only like recently, a few months ago, and I was just so interested and curious with the way she narrated her experience with Dostoyevsky. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna read a Dostoyevsky, but all of his novels are very heavy. They're not light in theme, and you guys know that. So I was very surprised when I found out that White Nights is a short story and centers around the pursuit of love. The White Nights by Fyodor Dostoyevsky is not a romance story. It's about the pursuit of romance. It's about the pursuit of love. And the idea that Dostoyevsky is trying to imbibe in his readers is that loving someone is a privilege, and you shouldn't demand like reciprocity from another person because that isn't always guaranteed, and you shouldn't resent them for that. What happened between the characters was the girl that this man, the main character, was trying to pursue, got her heart broken by this ex of hers. I don't know, her romantic pursuit. So she was trying to find comfort in the main character in White Nights, and then suddenly this ex of hers, let's just say, returns, and then all of a sudden the main character was like tossed aside, and that to me was a very heartbreaking moment. I related to that so much. At first, the main character was confused and just like jaded. because like what the hell happened? But like the eventual conclusion of the character was, it's okay, it was a privilege to have loved you. And that was so beautiful. That kind of made me devastated, because like, what do you mean? That's not possible. Like, why are you not angry? But yeah, this was such a what do you call this, refreshing perspective, and a little bit idealistic, but it's idealistic, but like at the same time it should be embodied. So yeah, I love this one. Such an unexpected read from Dostoyevsky, but I do appreciate it. I give it a 4.5 stars. Then for October, I was able to read another classic, and it's The Beautiful and Damned. The Beautiful and Damned by Fitzgerald. I gave this one a 3.75 stars. I like Fitzgerald's writing style. However, if you're still going into classics, I would suggest that you read it closely, or what we call close reading. But once you get into the rhythm of Fitzgerald, his writing is actually easy to absorb and very flowery. I appreciate his lush and flowery imageries. I think that's one of his strengths as a writer. I understand the longevity of this book, of why it's so long, but I feel like some of the chapters were a little bit stagnant, and I don't know, I feel like the emotional stakes between the characters Anthony and Gloria Patch wasn't really felt. The way it was structured was disproportionate, is what I want to say. Like the build up, as I said, or the exposition was so long, like building up the characters' background story and like the stakes, what they're doing, whatever, it was too long. But when it comes to the climax and the conflict and the resolution, it was kind of rushed to me. Yeah, and I kind of felt like some chapters were dragged on, and there were a lot of like paragraphs that were unnecessary. So yeah, but it was I don't hate it. I do appreciate it. And I actually have another Fitzgerald that I recently bought, which is Tender is the Night. I'm gonna show you. Look at how pretty that cover is. Yeah, such a pretty one. Hopefully I like this one better. I'm sensing like the main theme, honestly, of Fitzgerald is the fall of man, of how we can get a little bit too cocky of our skills and our, I don't know, our privileges as a person, and that kind of can cause our own fall and our own demise. I can sense that theme from him. So that's The Beautiful and Damned. And then November, I didn't really read. And then December, this was my most productive month. I was able to read 8 books. Okay, so the first read of December was A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. This is a coming of age story. I love the characters in this book so much. It basically talks about hope in the corners of destitution and poverty. The character here is so strong and courageous, but also like I can tell how much of her dreams were sacrificed to get by. But still, she didn't really give up on that, or on any of her dreams, honestly. Her name is Francie, and she's the strongest female character I've ever encountered upon. And I don't understand why this is not talked about more, this classic. It's a very wholesome while also tackling heavy themes. It talks about death, it talks about grief, it also talks about mother and daughter relationship. I was very melancholic and a little bit desolate when I was going through, or I was reading passages of Francie's thoughts when it comes to how her mother perceives her. I appreciate books that explore that in a successful manner. The next is my second read from Kafka, which is The Metamorphosis. I borrowed the book from my university library. I love this, despite its shortness. It's devastating. I was devastated at the end of the book because, okay, spoiler, Samsa killed himself. I'm like, what? The reason why it's so bitter is because he's been the breadwinner of the family ever since it's been established. And he gave so much. Like, he loved them unconditionally, despite the family, especially the parents, treating him so differently when they realized that he was never going to come back as in human form. Like, he was always going to be this cockroach, this huge, disgusting cockroach living in their roof. And that entire transformation shifted their relationship drastically. But despite that drastic change in the perspective of the parents, the way Samsa perceived his parents was still the same, despite being treated the way he was treated. And the reason why he killed himself was to alleviate his family's burden of him, to alleviate the burden they felt because of him. And that was very bittersweet to me. It's such an eldest daughter core. It's definitely like a book that I'll always remember and I'll always think of. Like, imagine, like, I remember that there's this one review that said, like, this is basically the epitome of that one micro trend in TikTok. Will you still love me if I'm a worm? That's basically the book. And in Samsa's circumstance, he wasn't, but still he loved them unconditionally, and he even killed himself for their freedom and liberation. So, and then the next read that I have is another short story. This is a classic. This is called The Yellow Wallpaper, and this was such like an what do you call this, hypnotic, there we go. This was such a hypnotic read. Despite its length, this was such a gripping read. It basically tackles, or we basically read through the thoughts, what goes in the thoughts of a woman who's suffering postpartum depression. And what's ironic, the ironic part of the story is her husband and her brother are both physicians, but they're both convincing her that it's all just temporary nervous system tics, that it's not a big deal. And this is still wildly applicable to the way postpartum depression is viewed in the modern world in the big age of 2026. A lot of people still don't believe it, and this book is a perfect depiction of what really goes on in the mind of a woman who isn't heard when she says she's feeling something is wrong. She feels like something is wrong with her. And we slowly see how that unravels. We slowly see how she eventually descends into that mania. This is a very significant still book that I feel like is an important read when you try to get into feminist literature. This is a very good book. Okay, and then the next one that I read is A Room of One's Own. This was also a recent buy. I bought it and I have so many thoughts about this book, but the thought that sticks out to me so much is this book did not only just criticize men and the patriarchal society and misogyny and sexism, it also criticized the women of the 21st century. I was so appalled, and in a good way. I was stricken when I read this passage. She basically called us out, and I was like, you know what? She's right. It says here, "What is your excuse?" That was a very, I was very taken aback when I read that. I was like, she has a point. And then she later on goes, "When you reflect upon these immense privileges and the length of time during which they have been enjoyed, and the fact that there must be at this moment some 2,000 women capable of earning over 500 a year in one way or another, you will agree that the excuse of lack of opportunity, training, encouragement, leisure, and money no longer holds good." let that sink into you. And while I do understand that the patriarchal society or the patriarchy is still heavily embedded in the society that we live in today, it's really incomparable to the circumstances that the women of yesteryear or yesterdecade, yestercentury experienced. So we can't really say that we're not privileged, because we are. And these women fought so hard for these privileges, and we're taking them for granted. We need to be more aware. We need to be more aware of the sacrifices that were made, the fights that were fought for us to enjoy these privileges, and why we should still fight, and why we should take advantage of these privileges that were given to us. I feel like after Letters to Milena, our Room of One's Own. And then next one is Journey into the Past, and this is a New York Review book classic. It's an NYRB classic. This has a pivotal message, and I appreciate the message of this. I know I appreciate every single message, but like this one, I feel like, oh shoot, my pearl. Anyways, I'm just gonna like cover that. Nice. This is such an important message for everyone who's still lingering on to the past, because this book explores this couple who hasn't seen each other for 9 years, and they're trying to feel what they've felt 9 years ago, and it doesn't work. And at first there was this sort of resentment that the male character felt for the female character. He was like, why aren't we working the same way that we did before? And the conclusion basically is, you don't have the right to hold resentment for this person you haven't interacted with in the past 9 years. You can't control the way a person changes, and change is inevitable. And sometimes the way a person change may not necessarily fit anymore with the current version of you, and you have to make peace with that. You can't hold resentment for that person because you no longer connect with them the same way you did before. And I feel like that applies also not just in relationships but also in friendships, because I feel like there's a lot of discourse about like friendships that I never feel anymore, or it's just not the same anymore. Like, we can't hold resentment towards that person because change is inevitable, and you have to allow this person to change despite it meaning that you may not have the same relationship that you have before. That's a final act of love you can give to that person, to give them that room for change and to accept the kind of relationship that you have now. So yeah, this was such like a pivotal read for me. It spoke to me in a lot of ways. And then my next read, this is Claire Keegan's Foster. And I don't know, I just love found family tropes. And this one is basically, it has found family trope written all over it. So we follow this kid who was basically like fostered, but she's not an orphan. Basically, her dad told her that you are going to stay with these people for a few months because we don't have any more room for you, because we're expecting a baby and we don't have any more room for you, kind of like that. So like, she spends time with this family, these people, a mother and a father, and then when she comes back, she realizes that this isn't a home that she's coming back to, and the only home and the only family that she's ever felt like was an actual family and an actual home was the one that she spent only a few months in. And to me, this book depicts that sometimes your family isn't your heart family. I want to say your heart family, like your heart family is different from your blood family, and sometimes the heart family weighs a lot more than your blood family, and this book depicts that. And now my next and final read of 2025 is John Steinbeck's The Pearl. This book angered me, not like super angered, but like at first I was able to sympathize with the main character, which is, what do you call his name? Kino. I was able to sympathize first with Kino at the like beginning parts of the book, because I do understand the effects of being deprived of something for so long, and when you're presented or when you're given an opportunity to like break the chains of poverty, sometimes it can get in your head At first I was like, okay, I understand why he's doing what he's doing, but when the ending happened and he was just so persistent with trying to have a higher appraisal of the pearl, I was so pissed off because it had such a drastic and heartbreaking, devastating ending. I'm not gonna spoil it for you, but it was so devastating. I was like so shocked when I read that line. I was like, what? What? And this is a perfect depiction of what poverty can do. You know, like what lines one is willing to cross to overcome poverty. And I understand where Kino is coming from, but we also need to acknowledge when to draw the line, when we're doing things out of character, and when we're doing things that are eventually going to harm the people that we love. So I feel like those values and those mindsets should really come above the desire to overcome poverty or to break the chains of poverty, because if you're breaking the chains of poverty in the expense of another, that's not necessarily a good way to break the cycle. And those are the 20 books that I read this year. Thank you. Sorry. Yeah. Bye. I don't know how I'm gonna edit this. What do you mean I'm gonna edit an hour and 28 minutes of content? Okay. See you. Bye.